In the name of the one who was and is to come. Amen. In the beginning was the Word. Those opening words of the Gospel according to John are one of the things that distinguishes John's Gospel from the other three. It's perhaps the most theologically sophisticated of all the Gospels, even self-consciously so. In the beginning was the Logos. John's identification of Jesus with the Word, the Logos, well, that strongly echoes other intellectual movements in his time. John presents Jesus as much as a roaming theologian as an itinerant healer. But there's another feature of John's Gospel that I always find problematic. It's often ugly anti-Jewish polemic. I mean, by the end of the first century, with Jerusalem and the temple in ruins, nascent Christianity, at least Christianity as John's community, experienced it and embodied it. Nascent Christianity was at loggerheads with nascent rabbinical Judaism. So this anti-Jewish prejudice of John's community in the years around 100 AD, 3 generations after Jesus' life, well, it was likely read back into the events of Jesus' day. And the prejudicial results of that backward projection in John's Gospel have infected Christianity like a virus, even to the present day. For example, lovers of Bach's St. John's Passion, like me, well, we've been accustomed to reading program notes that downplay or even try to excuse the disturbing anti-Jewish sentiments of the text that Bach has set to such stunning music. And I thank God that our own Good Friday liturgy has pretty much eliminated the ancient and offensive prayers for the conversion of the Jews. But I'm not alone in dreading the recitation of John's version of the Passion in the midst of the Good Friday service, when Pilate comes off better than the Jewish mob. But then, in amazing contrast, there are moments like this morning's moment, set in Lazarus' house in Bethany. John seems to have access to intimate details of Jesus' life and the lives of his friends and of his followers. There are details available to John that were available, it seems, to none of the other 3 gospel writers. It's the brilliant way he structures the reporting of events, his sense of timing, his eye for the telling detail, the sheer beauty of this storytelling. I mean, no wonder that in spite of all its intellectual and political challenges, John's gospel has been central to our sense of who we are as Christians and who we are called to be as continuing followers of Christ. And that's especially the case in the stories that John tells about Lazarus and his sisters, including the story you just heard. For some reason, Mark, Luke, and Matthew had no access to the Lazarus episodes. Only John seems to know these stories. In John's gospel, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus are Jesus' closest friends, closer to him than any of his disciples except maybe Mary Magdalene. And it's in the house of Lazarus, Mary, and Martha that Jesus feels most at home, the one place in the Gospels where he seems to be able safely to lay his head. And it's in their house that he finds his last moments of peace before his final foray into Jerusalem. 6 days before that Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he'd raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Well, as always with John, there's much more to this story than meets the eye or the ear. I mean, just moments before, if we were reading John's gospel, just moments before, John had told us that the chief priests had heard of Lazarus being raised from the dead, and they began to devise a plot to murder the miracle worker who had raised him up. And now word has gotten out, and so Jesus, we're told, no longer walks openly. So it looks like Lazarus and his sisters have provided Jesus with what we would call a safe house as the plot against him begins to tighten. But in spite of the heightened tension, everything at that dinner party seems ordinary in the way that John presents it. Lazarus presides, Martha serves, and Mary is assigned the foot washing task that's common and necessary in such households, where everybody wore sandals and walked through the dust before they came into the house. But John's matter-of-factness here shouldn't fool us. Just a few days before, John had described Lazarus as being 4 days rotting in the grave. And now, here, Lazarus, fully restored, is throwing a dinner party. The ordinary has become extraordinary. And when Mary empties a jug, not a jug of water, but an expensive jar of ointment over Jesus' dirty feet and wipes them with her hair, an ordinary gesture of hospitality takes on both intimate and cosmic implications. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. I mean, for me, the most amazing thing about the way John tells this story is what you might call the smell of it. The smell of it. Remember, Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, wiped them with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Now, traditionally, smell was considered to be the lowest, the basest of the human senses. The noble sense was sight. Sight, as opposed to touch or smell. Sight implied a safe distance, objectivity, space and time to think, to categorize, to judge. Smell was just the opposite. It was considered the earthiest, the fleshiest of the five senses. Sight implied distance. Smell was immediate, inescapable, overwhelming. Smell invades the sensing body. No distance is possible. You either put up with it, you literally take it in, or you try to get away. So, imagine yourself sitting with Lazarus, Jesus, and that dinner party. You're enjoying your food. And out of nowhere, Mary uncaps that jar and pours out a full pound's worth of expensive nard. It's aromatherapy run amok. I imagine that everyone in that dinner party dropped their equivalent of their forks in shock and maybe reared backwards off their benches. What was that woman thinking? wasting the ointment like that, filling the house with this overpowering stench, bringing the whole feast to a grinding halt. But when you think about it, that was not the first time a sudden stench figured in the Lazarus story. It was just a few days before. Lazarus was dead in his tomb, the tomb sealed by a stone. And Jesus arrives 4 days late. And yet with the tears still rolling down his cheek, he orders the stone to be rolled away. And Martha, God bless her, Martha tried to stop him. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." And Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he's been dead 4 days." Or in the immortal words of the King James translation from 1611, "Lord, he stinketh." Fast forward now to Lazarus' dining room. I like to think that the smell of the perfume, this rich, expensive, and generous smell, is no stench, but the odor of sanctity, and it overcomes the stench of death. Mary's extravagant outpouring, an outpouring that defies all notions of economy and even of safety. Mary's extravagant outpouring anticipates the shattering events to come in this week of Passover, when the death and resurrection of Jesus will overcome death itself. "Leave her alone," Jesus says to Judas. "She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial." But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" Yeah, I know, I just quoted that sentence without the stuff in parentheses, where John tells us, he takes pains to remind us who Judas was, that he would betray Jesus in the next several days, and besides, he'd been a thief all along. Don't believe, well, okay. I'm not here to defend Judas, but I am here to admit that Judas has a point. Maybe what drove Judas to betray Jesus in the days that followed was this very extravagance, this seeming disregard for economy and for measured benevolence. I mean, even knowing what we know about what happened, it's hard not to sympathize with Judas here. To be honest, I probably would have reacted the same way. And maybe some of you would too. As with Judas, my instinct is to measure love, to contain it, to control my generous instincts, lest by giving away too much, I have nothing more to give. I mean, to Judas's dismay, and I suspect to ours, Jesus will have none of that. God's love is boundless. It fills the world the way the smell of that expensive perfume filled that room. Economy and measure be damned when love is at stake. So, let's face it, we live in cruel days. Days, you know how bad it is when these are days when even Judas looks good in comparison. He at least acknowledged that the poor deserve help, which is more than we can expect from the present-day masters of the national purse strings. So my prayer in these mean-spirited days is that we, like Mary, can cast aside anxiety and the fear of loss. As Mary lavished that ointment, can we lavish works of love? Can we follow Jesus in a ministry of healing, reconciliation, and justice, even if it means leaving the safety of Lazarus' house to walk with Jesus along the road to Calvary and the cross? These days, loving Jesus, loving others as Jesus loved us, loving others as Jesus loved us, has began to look like taking an existential risk, a life and death risk. We gather here in this place and places like this, and we gather at this table to acknowledge that loving others as Jesus loved us and then acting accordingly is an existential risk that we're committed to take. Amen.